Hello, my name's John Knight. I'm a Programme Director at CIPFA. And at CIPFA, we work with a lot of organisations who are looking to become more commercial. That might mean generating income, it might mean becoming more business-like, it might mean developing new delivery models. And whilst we can help them with all those things, one of the things that they often overlook is the cultural aspect of it. It often becomes the last thing they think about when actually we think it should be the first thing that they should consider. So over the next 10 minutes or so, I'm going to take you through a few slides about developing a commercial culture and some of the key aspects you need to consider for that.
So what I'll be covering in the next few minutes is effectively about how we think about culture and behaviours when we're talking about change, especially as regards to commercial change. I'll look at those factors of a commercial culture, the different elements that make up why people behave in the way they do. First things first, let's talk about how we don't put the cart before the horse and start out by understanding what it is we're trying to achieve. Then we'll look at, based on that, how we need to diagnose how those key factors apply to the culture we're trying to achieve. And lastly, I'll briefly talk about how we need to take action.
Being commercial, there's a thing, isn't it? What do people mean when they talk about being commercial? Well, quite often the go-to places when people want to change commercial behaviours or become more commercial in an organisation is to think about things like structure, think about things like processes and governance, the kind of tangible, hard things that you would need to change in an organisation that you wanted to act in a more commercial way. Now, when I say hard, I mean hard as in things you can touch, not hard as in difficult. While some of those things can be quite challenging, the thing that will be more challenging is the invisible stuff, and that's the culture and the behaviours. That's the bit that sits at the centre, at the heart of that Venn diagram. You can have the best structure, the best processes, the best governance in the world, but without the right culture and behaviours that sit right at the centre of that, you're going nowhere with your culture change. How do we address culture change? Well, I've lost count of the number of times when I've been working in organisations when we start to talk about a new culture or new behaviours, and the response is something along the lines of, I don't do all that soft and cuddly, tree hugging stuff about culture. We just want new processes in place that are going to make people behave in a different way. Culture change is too hard for us to get our head around. We can't do that. Let's just get on with it and do something a bit more tangible. Well, let's get one thing straight for a start. Culture change does not look like this. It's not soft, fluffy and cuddly and doesn't have to be addressed in that kind of way. Quite the contrary, culture change looks more like this. It is a science, not an art. We can apply some quite rigorous methodology to it to understand what it is that we want to change, and then we can apply some rules and we can apply some tools to that to make the change happen. So if we can treat behaviour change and culture change in a scientific way, we need to think what the three key factors are that actually influence culture change, and therefore develop a behavioural diagnosis of what we can do differently. Those three factors I refer, for sake of simplicity, as skill, will and fulfill. And when those three factors are aligned, you can get the level of change you need. So what do we mean by those three words? Well, skill is probably the most obvious one. People need to be capable of delivering the change. They actually either need to be capable of learning what needs to happen, or they need to be physically able to do something. The second one, and probably the most important one, is will. And what we mean here is people need to have the motivation to change. They actually really need to want to change or psychologically be able to change. And the third factor, the fulfill one, really means that people need to be given the right environment and the opportunities to change. They need to be told it's okay. They need to be given the right tools to make it happen. Get those three factors right, and you can make the change happen. But let's just stop for a minute. Before we get into the detail of the kind of actions we need to take to address the culture change, why don't we actually go back to basics and say, what do we mean by that kind of behaviour change that we want? So what is behaviour? Well, it might sound blindingly obvious, but actually we could simply define behaviour as anything a person does in response to internal or external events, how they behave. So that's the behaviour. What about the change? Okay, so how do we want them to respond differently in the future? What do we want to change them to? Why do we want them to change? To what? What would success look like if they did change? Let's have a think about that before we move on to all the areas that we want to diagnose. So let's be very, very clear what needs to change, why it needs to change, and how you want people to act differently in the future. Get that right, and you're halfway there. So we're halfway there then, aren't we? That's great. Now we just need to go back and look at those three elements of skill, will, and fulfill, and think about what it is that makes up those different factors and how we could actually diagnose what needs to happen. So let's start with skill. If we said that skill is about people need to be capable of delivering the change, you can break that down into effectively two subcategories. The first of those is physical ability. What I mean is, for example, let's say Seiko wanted to go into the business of ballet dancing. Now, with the best will in the world, I'm afraid I'm never going to be a ballet dancer. I just haven't got the stature for it, and no matter how much you train me, it's not going to happen. So I just don't have the physical ability to do the things that people might want me to do in that instance. The second side of skill is the psychological capability. You know, with the right amount of training, with the right amount of experience, would people be able to deliver the kind of behaviours that we want them to be able to, so they can deliver that change? So that's actually, do they have effectively the mental abilities to be able to do that? I'll move on next to fulfill and leave will till last. Fulfill, as we said previously, is about people being given the right environment and the opportunities to change. By the right environment, again, we can break that down into the key components of that, which the first is physical changes. To actually deliver on something differently and to behave differently, people sometimes need the right environment, as in the right office, the right IT kit. The office needs to be in the right place. They just need actually the right stuff to be able to deliver what they need to deliver. And then secondly, it's what we call the social changes. Effectively, it's putting in place the right mechanisms, whether that's governance, whether that's management structures, to allow people to deliver on the change. In the public sector, people talk about the risk environment. They talk about becoming a more risk-aware organisation. It's allowing people to take risks, allowing them to fail but learn. It's about allowing people to be more entrepreneurial, unshackling them. It's those kind of changes that need to be put in place and acted upon so that people can actually deliver the required amount of change. And the third of those three elements is will, the toughest nut to crack, in my opinion. People need to have the motivation to change. Again, let's break it down. First of all, it's the conscious stuff, the people thinking, I don't like this, I don't want this to happen, this is not in my job description, this is not why I come to work, not what I signed up to. A lot of those kind of phrases can be quite familiar sometimes to people trying to develop a more commercial way of thinking. The other side of conscious is, of course, unconscious. Those are the things that are just deeply ingrained within us from our upbringing and what makes us tick as a human being, really. We don't consciously think we don't like something, we just know that within us there's something that things don't sit comfortably with. So that kind of unconscious motivation can be a real issue too. So we need to think of those three key components, like the three legs of a stool. You need to get all three of them addressed to actually make the change. You have two without the third, and it's just going to fall over. So, for example, you get people who have got the right skill to make things happen, and they really have the will and the motivation to make that change. But if they're not allowed to fulfill that, you get frustration. Frustration leads to tension and anger, and nothing happens. If you get people with the right level of will and they're being given the opportunity to fulfill the change that's wanted, but actually they don't have the skills to do it, you get inability. And thirdly, if you have the right levels of skill and people are given the opportunity to fulfill and make that change, but there's no will, nothing happens. There's inaction. So you need to get all three of them addressed in every way in order to make the change. Over the years, we've worked with a lot of organisations that have been looking to change their culture, often to change to a more commercial culture. And one of our key findings, our key learning, has been to actually get those organisations to pause and really stop and think about the change they're trying to make happen. So, first of all, to understand the changes of behaviours they want within their people, and then look at skill, will and fulfill, and think about what it is that might be stopping that change from happening. So don't jump to the conclusions that we just need to train everybody to be commercial. That's always everybody's default go-to knee-jerk reaction to a commercial culture. It's obviously all about training. Well, there's more to it than training. Training is one element, but it's certainly not the only one. Once we've actually understood what might be stopping the change from happening, then we can actually look at those actions we can develop to address those. And there are a whole range of actions that can be taken, considerations that can be given. And that is what I'll be talking about in part 2, the interventions to develop a commercial culture. If there's been anything in this presentation that you found interesting or helpful, or you'd just like to ask any questions, then please feel free to email me at this address or telephone me. Alternatively, go to our website or contact us direct at We Are CIPFA. Thank you for listening.